Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. My book, Cassandra Killjoy Paranormal Private Eye, The Search for the Swordsman, is available on Amazon.com. You can buy your copy right now by following the link in the description box. And for more information, feel free to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Enjoy the video. Did you know that 20th Century Fox had a sequel greenlit and ready to follow the original Ben Affleck Daredevil movie? Unfortunately, that follow-up was just not meant to be, and it has faded away into yet another of the legends of fandom. Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. I'm Erodin of the Blockbuster Buster, and welcome to Legends of Fandom, where we talk about the fanboy films and shows that almost happened. Now, before we begin, for those of you who don't know, created by Stan Lee, Bill Everett, and Jack Kirby in 1964, Matt Murdock was an average kid who saw an elderly man about to get hit by a car and bravely pushed him out of the way. But his heroism came with a price, as Matt is struck by the vehicle instead, loses his sight, and gets drenched in toxic chemicals that the vehicle was carrying. But while the accident took his ability to see, it gave him something greater in its place, as the chemicals heightened his other senses to optimal levels, giving him what is described as a radar sense, the ability to see far more than your average man. So as an adult, Matt fights the corruption of Hell's Kitchen on two fronts, as a lawyer by day and vigilante by night. Because even though justice might be blind, it can see in the dark, and it is exclusively represented by the man without fear, Daredevil. In the 90s, Marvel Productions saw a string of successes through their animated shows. What a lot of people don't know is that a lot of these shows were used as proof of concept for studios to buy the film rights and produce movies based on the characters. And Daredevil was no exception. In 1996, the creators of Spider-Man the Animated Series produced an epic two-part episode called Framed and the Man Without Fear, in which Spider-Man meets Daredevil. Even though Spider-Man was teaming up with a relatively obscure character, the network went all out and aired both episodes back-to-back as if they were a full-length feature on a primetime spot on a Saturday night, and advertised the whole thing like it was a network special. And just to put the sprinkles on the sundae, they released the two episodes on their own on a VHS, with the very misleading title, Daredevil vs. Spider-Man, even though the two characters fight for less than a minute. And it worked, as the special got really good ratings and the VHS did really well on both sales and rentals. About a year later, the official announcement that 20th Century Fox bought the film rights to Daredevil would hit the trades. But this was a film that we wouldn't see until 2003. At the time, the Daredevil movie was considered to be a very divisive film between critics and fans, and its mediocre box office numbers seemed to be what ended the argument. But, like his comic book counterpart, Daredevil would be born again. Because even though the movie had a very average box office run, it killed on home media, making very impressive sales on both VHS and DVD. So plans began for a follow-up. And now, for the question that all of you have been waiting for. What would Daredevil 2 be like? According to producer Avi Arad, Ben Affleck was due to return as Matt Murdock / Daredevil, as he had signed a multi-picture deal, and he would have definitely been reunited with Jon Favreau as Foggy Nelson and the late great Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin. But Duncan had a very specific condition for reprising his role. He didn't want to put on all that weight again. Instead, his suggestion was that in part 2, we would see Wilson Fisk after a few months of hitting the weights in jail, and be in a more tone and muscular physical condition, whom Michael Clark Duncan jokingly described as health-conscious Kingpin. Cause being bad doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make bad personal choices. Thankfully, we did get to see Duncan reprise his role one more time in MTV's Spider-Man the New Animated Series, which is not as exciting as seeing him portray the character on camera, but cool nonetheless. Now, as far as the other villain who appears in the original movie, while Bullseye appears to be alive and on the mend in the post-credit scene of the original movie, Bullseye, there is no evidence that the filmmakers intended to bring him back for part 2. Director Mark Steven Johnson has confirmed that the plan was to introduce a new villain, which more than likely would have been Mr. Fear. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Fear, aka Sultan Drago, is an employee at a wax museum who discovers a compound that triggers the flight response in animals and humans, which he calls the flight scent. It's a fear gas. It's just a fear gas. Basically, Mr. Fear is the Scarecrow, but not as smart, but with decent fighting skills. Also, he's more sadistic and obsessive, targeting specific victims with his fear gas and even devising custom-made scenarios to cause his victims to either die of fear or accidentally kill themselves out of panic. Mark Steven Johnson's plan was to have the Kingpin torment Daredevil through Mr. Fear while he's stuck in jail, and basically put the fear in the man without fear. As far as who they would have casted as Mr. Fear, unfortunately the production didn't get far enough to even name candidates. But personally, I think the perfect choice would have been Matt Damon. Yes, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon together in a superhero movie. Who wouldn't pay to see that? While Elektra magically comes back to life in her own movie, there were no plans to bring Jennifer Gardner back as the Master Assassin in Daredevil 2. Instead, the movie would have explored Matt Murdock's romance with Karen Page, who is very briefly played by the lovely and talented Ellen Pompeo in the original movie. Sadly, we wouldn't see that romantic subplot be adapted into live action until the Marvel Netflix Daredevil series. But honestly, it was worth the wait. But the most exciting prospect about Daredevil 2 is that Mark Steven Johnson planned to adapt the most beloved and celebrated storyline from the comic, Daredevil Born Again. In fact, Daredevil Born Again was one of the tentative titles for the movie, as opposed to the generic Daredevil 2. In the storyline, after a very horrible fall from grace, Karen Page sells the information of Daredevil's true identity for a shot of heroin. The information is then sold upwards to the Kingpin, who proceeds to dismantle Matt Murdock's life bit by bit, freezing his assets, getting him disbarred, and blowing up his apartment, leaving our hero as a street-dwelling vagabond, desperate to get his life back and bring his nemesis to justice. Now in the movie, the Kingpin finds out Matt's true identity during the film's climax, so there wouldn't be any need to fridge Karen Page in order to set up the story. With that said, Born Again was loosely adapted during the 3rd season of the Marvel Netflix show, and it is the title of the revival that is due to premiere on Disney+. So we have been fortunate enough to see the storyline adapted and referenced in mainstream media. But still, it would have been nice to see superfan and director Mark Steven Johnson's take on the storyline, especially since he was due to have more creative freedom in the sequel. And now for the most important question in the video. Why didn't this happen? The answer is actually pretty simple. Elektra. For reasons that are beyond my comprehension, the final deciding factor to move forward with Daredevil 2 hinged on the success of the spin-off movie, Elektra. Now, most analysts already knew this movie was dead on arrival, as it starred an obscure supporting character from a movie starring another obscure character that had a less than stellar box office run, and the movie was due to release just 1 year after Halle Berry's Catwoman set back female-led comic book movies for over a decade. But again, for some reason, 20th Century Fox hinged the entire fate of the franchise on this one movie. As expected, Elektra bombed, and Fox allowed the rights to Daredevil to remain stagnant until they expired 7 years later and reverted back to Marvel, who would go on to produce the critically acclaimed Netflix series that we know and love. The head of Marvel Television, Jeff Loeb, has said that it was probably for the better that Daredevil 2 was cancelled, because if it hadn't, they never would have been able to make the Daredevil show that they are all so very proud of. And if they had moved forward with Daredevil 2, then more than likely, Jon Favreau would have been far too busy playing Foggy Nelson to direct Elf, which is the movie that helped him transition from an indie director to a mainstream director, and put him on the path to direct Iron Man. And I don't know about you, but a world without the Netflix Daredevil show and Jon Favreau's Iron Man is a world that I don't want to live in. But what do you think? Would you have liked to have seen Mark Steven Johnson get another crack at Daredevil, or are you happy with the current Charlie Cox era of the franchise? Let me know in the comment section below, as we have once again reached the end of this video. So, do you know of any fanboy films or shows that almost happened? Let me know at erod@inbox.com, and who knows, your suggestion might end up being the topic of the next Legends of Fandom. Until then, I'm Erod, and I'm the Blockbuster Buster.